Wellington. 4 to 6 inches of snow fell in the Highlands last night, and the weather is bitterly cold. Continuous rains during the spring have prevented farmers ploughing, and very little is done yet. The milk supply is falling away, but sheep and lambs are doing well. Rain, which has been threatening all morning, started shortly before 11 o'clock and will seriously affect attendance at the races and local sports. Christchurch. The worst October gale for years is now raging. There was a very heavy snowstorm followed by hail and heavy rain this morning. The telegraph lines to the north are down, and the only connection with the North Island is by the west coast. The ferry steamer from Wellington is not expected till the afternoon. The weather is bitterly cold with frequent showers. Dannevirke. Dannevirke is plunged back to winter. 3.5 inches of rain fell during the last 3 days. Last night there was heavy hailstorm. The mountains and low-lying hills around the town are literally coated with snow. Dunedin. There has been heavy snow throughout the Lakes District, and the fall is likely to have disastrous effect on the lambs. As I pointed out in a recent video, it was a mite colder a century ago, even 60 years ago. Periods of history we seem to have forgotten, or somehow got unwittingly engaged in mass selective memory syndrome. To give this video a foundation and not see it banned by YouTube, let's remind ourselves of what this country is aiming for in terms of the so-called plan to save the planet, net zero, taking everything at face value. As I've also mentioned before, in respect to climate change, I describe myself as a misanthropic, stoic absconder. If it's sunny outside, I'll wear a hat, so that's where I'm coming from. Let's therefore go with the message and establish when those pre-industrial times occurred, and split the difference for the ease of maths and say broadly, as a country, we've signed up to an average temperature in 1800 plus 1.5 degrees. Looking at the best long-term non-sciencey graph with the shittiest graphics dating back to the period in New Zealand I could Google up at 1.5 degrees, and we end up with the weather we had as it was like in or about 1980, thereabouts. Now I've got that graph up. It correlates nicely with what I asserted in my last video on the subject. That's to say, the period roughly 1880 to 1910 produced the most headlines and reports about storms, floods, etc. If you haven't seen it, I'll link it at the end. Amongst all the hyperbole and hysteria, one thing's to be missing in this blind mad rush to get temperatures down. Just as the average temperature can trend up, like has been drummed into us, like we are again 6 and learning the times table, it can trend down, and global weather isn't like a home air conditioner. You can't simply fire it up, wait for it to heat up or cool, and set the dial for when you get home from work, settle on a comfortable temperature, and Bob's your uncle. Let's say all the initiatives like EVs and solar power become the norm. Bovine hunts are getting rid of the last remaining few feral cows. Birds are still getting lopped into mid-air. Who exactly is going to press the climate change stop button as it trends down? Just as importantly, who is going to challenge the agendas of purist environmentalists, globalists and left-wing politicians once they've got their spokes in? Even governments today, I know they can run roughshod over farmers, working class Kiwi families with cheap economical cars in their garages from Japan. To the zealots, 1.5 degrees must surely therefore be a starting point. The first target mitigating mankind's chronic climatic effects for the last 225 years. That byline about pre-industrial ages and doesn't seem to get much press. What are the odds when we're heading towards achieving this first target? Another one pops up. or we go below the 1.5 in the course of things, back to a time even fractionally below 1980, when the weather in New Zealand was decidedly colder. Fairly sure the incumbent Green MP for Auckland Central wasn't campaigning for frost during winter for her constituents. At a pinch, snow on odd occasions. Be careful for what you wish for when saving the planet. Weather-wise, it's going to be a lot shittier than today. Extinction Rebellion's utopian Brave New World is looking back at you. By 2050, it's hardly a stretch to say, rather than going back to the Paris Agreement weather we experienced 70 years ago, we get what it was like 80 and 90 years ago, or even more, exceeding the global target, Part A, even ever so slightly. We'll then be in the winters of the 50s, 60s and 70s. And boy oh boy, will people be in for a shock of their lives. The grand irony here is the now middle-aged climate zealots of today will be the ones affected. They will have to put up the same weather as their more stoic and resilient great-grandparents. Let me again delve into the historic papers of that period to further reacquaint ourselves as to what the climate campaigners are campaigning for. Today's politicians are also cheerleaders for. Move past the emotive into reality. It's winter, August 1973, 40 kilometres from where I live, according to my bike computer. 30,000 sheep and 600 cows perish in a snowstorm. Still, I guess it's only farmers, who cares? What do they do to the economy, I ask you? Even today, falls like this happen in this region that time of year. Still, it's not like the North Islands or those sort of snowfalls as well, is it? I'm sure in another 30 years they would have figured out what to do when the main road out of Dunedin is closed for 3 days at a time due to snow. Besides, we all know that electric vehicles thrive in cold temperatures. Heaps of electric buses are already in the nation's fleet. We can rest comfortably knowing New Zealand's infrastructure has improved immensely since the mid-70s. Around the weather period we hope to re-embrace. These new highways are well capable of dealing to future biannual closures on the desert road. Similarly, between Christchurch and the West Coast. But so far, this has been a very one-sided report on how the downward spiral will impact humans. Let's now look at bird life. 125 kilometres away from Darfield and on a high country farm in the Canterbury foothills, it's 1967 and severe temperatures has killed off all the birds, natives and all. Again, like before, I like you would expect that in winter, now and again. Only that report was a few days before Christmas. It now springs to mind as I wrap this one up. I must have missed something here. Is it now Green Party policy to advocate for weather that kills off bird life? What a pity recreational travel in 2050 will solely be the preserve of the rich, politicians and their families, in the middle of what effectively, by modern standards, will be a 5-month winter every year. People could have scooted off to Fiji, that sort of place. Shame the CO2 is still pouring out of aircraft engines. Net zero, now being the official global religion, means most people in 3 decades will never leave New Zealand's shores their entire lives. Poor diddums. Make no bones about it, the fine print, the end game in this campaign to reduce global temperatures will mean more snows, more floods, not less, longer winters, colder summers for the whole country of New Zealand. come 2060, reality will well and truly have sunk in through the 3 layers of clothing. Then guess what will happen? It will be the children of today's climate campaigners that will then be marching down the streets, urging the government and the UN to do something about the cold, and chiding their parents, who are presently outside clearing the driveway of snow in October. Bye for now.